All right. Thanks everyone for giving us a little time this February for a monthly PGB meeting for the OCA. We do have quite an extensive agenda to go through today. I was hoping to send it out a little bit more in advance, but there was a lot of activities going on this week. And so did get to send it out very early this morning. So hope some of you at least had a chance to review it and go over it, because there's a lot of things to go over here today, and I'm kind of optimistically hoping that we can cover most of it, but we'll see where we get to. So the first item on the agenda is this update on a significant change that's been made to Oasis open projects that I think it's very relevant to us because it's a change that I was actually pushing for because of the OCA, and it got adopted by the board, and it made me very happy. So essentially what this change means is we are now allowed to adopt a standing rule to let maintainers create and manage their GitHub repositories as they see fit, so long as those maintainers are using a previously approved license. What do we mean by previously approved license? Well, part of the rules for Oasis Open projects is that the project governing board has to approve any licenses that the project uses. In the OCA case, all of our projects are using Apache license currently. If I'm remembering everything correctly, we are all currently using Apache for the projects. If we do decide, and there's an agenda item here later today to talk about the documentation repository and the license on that we'll get to. If we did decide ever to have a project that for some reason we didn't want to license as Apache, that has to go to the project governing board here for approval. But if the technical steering committee wants to restructure their code and reorganize their code in any way, shape, or form that they think is valid, we are able to delegate that authority to them so that we no longer have to bother this group with administrivia around, we want to make this new repo for this Kestrel sub library, or we need to make this new repo for this pace component. We can leave those technical details up to the subject matter experts who are actually building the code and not bother all the folks in this call with them. So there's some text here on the screen that I would like to propose we adopt. It's the part in italics. So what this would be is a standing rule saying that we as the PGB delegate this authority to the technical steering committee to make these decisions. So if you can all give that a quick read, and I'll open up the floor here for questions about this in any way. But essentially I'm proposing that we adopt this text that's in italics and add it to our governance document as a standing rule for the OCA. Any questions on that, or just discussion points?
Here, good work.
Agreed.
All right, perfect. Well, it sounds like we have a working consensus. So I'll send that out after this call to the mailing list just to ensure that we maintain that consensus. And, unless someone raises some kind of objection, we'll assume that this is approved and go ahead and add that to the governance document. All right, fantastic. So that was the first item. Second is the technical steering committee. So folks who have been attending these meetings over the past couple of months have known that we've been talking a lot about the technical steering committee and how we had to reconstitute it because technically we didn't have a technical steering committee anymore since the previous technical steering committee expired based on our governance, and no one wanted to nominate themselves for renewal. So we had a lot of discussions around this, both in the January meeting and the December meeting, and we had consensus that ideally the technical steering committee should be made up of people and representatives from all the different projects, so that we actually had people who were motivated to have the technical steering committee succeed because they're actually driving these projects in the first place. And that kind of made a lot of sense. So what we did was we had a call, brought all of the maintainers for the key projects onto that call. So we had folks from Kestrel, Stickshifter, Pace, all involved. And we also invited Matthias and Mark from Tenzier, and Duncan also attended. So just a reminder for everybody here, the governance document makes it clear that anyone on the project governing board can sit in on and be a member of the TSC at any point in time. So Mark and Duncan were both acting in that capacity. And essentially, we want to propose that this be the TSC for the OCA at this point in time. Not saying that we can't add more members to the technical steering committee. That can always happen at the at the discretion of the PGB. We can have folks nominate themselves and bring it to this group, and we can add more. This is just, we have to get this group up and running. We have to get it started, and work through some of these governance issues, like, how are we going to accept pull requests? How are we going to have like a unified versioning policy across all these different projects? How are we going to approach things like, are things going to be all in mono repos or sub repos, to the discussion earlier? All these kind of technical administrivia and minutia, they actually get more and more important as these projects get higher visibility. And we've been lagging on getting this group organized. So the proposal is request to this group that, this be designated the current OCA PGB. We update the website to point at this list of people. Again, we can always add more or revisit it, but this is the request at this point in time. So I'll open up the floor here for discussion on that. Does anyone have any questions, concerns, discussion points around these individuals, and why they're on the TSC? All right.
Only concern is there seems to be an awful lot of these IBM typers running the show, but in the absence of me raising my hand to do it in their stead, I guess I have to succumb to the IBM dominance of Oasis. Maybe that was a little melodramatic, but it was intended to be humorous.
Well, so
The reason this is Duncan. The reason I'm on there is to be the anti-IBM, to make sure it's not too IBM focused.
All right, thank you, Duncan. Lead the charge.
I'm very cognizant of that personally, Forrest. And I think so.
And
I guess
it's kind of funny.
Yeah, I mean it
kind of tongue in cheek, but when I saw that IBM's also running the OSLC, which we're going to try to work with on a little bit more closely on the ontology side too. I just thought that was kind of humorous. I'm like, oh, there's more IBMers. That's all. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I'm not involved in OSLC, so I'm not involved in that whatsoever. But I think so for this list, I mean, there's actually 5 non-IBMers and only 2 IBMers, which is good. I think we would love to have some other folks come in and work their way up to maintainer status for Kestrel and Stickshifter. I would love that to happen, and hopefully over time that will happen. We're just not there yet, unfortunately. I do want to make it extremely clear, right? Anyone from any of the organizations on this call or on the project governing board or outside the project governing board. We would love to have folks nominate themselves to help on the technical side, and they don't necessarily have to be maintainers of these projects. They just have to be folks who can put in a little bit of time and have experience stewarding projects and, you know, leading technical projects and helping make these kinds of decisions. We did put out the call for nominations multiple times and weren't able to recruit anyone, so unfortunately. But
Yeah, Jason, like I said, I'm not against it. I know if they're the ones who are committed, it's better to have people committed to it regardless of where they're from than it is to have a capabilities founder. So again, I was just tongue in cheek. I think we're good, or at least I'm good.
Okay. Any other questions or concerns about how this will go about? All right, if there's no other concerns, then again, you know, we will send this out to the mailing list after the meeting and move forward with these. So these, by the way, so all of the decision points that are in this agenda, according to the governance of the OCA, we can adopt via lazy consensus. So we don't need formal votes on these things. There is an item in this agenda that does need a vote, and we'll get to that here in a second. So that's good, because we all know that getting the votes whipped is sometimes a challenge. All right, so that's that agenda item. Fantastic. So, and by the way, this group has already organized a monthly meeting, a Slack channel, out of band discussions. So they're already starting to work through some of these. So that was very good. I think they have a good handle on what some of the pain points are. Duncan, you got your hand raised?
Yeah, just one point on that. We'll discuss it later as part of the organization, and hopefully the TSC will get its own repo, which might solve this issue. But because the meetings are open to all, if they could make it into those email spams I get all the time on the various meetings that go on in OCA. So, you know, besides the developer meeting and the marketing meeting and whatever meetings, if we could make sure the announcement goes out, because they are open to everybody. Obviously, we should make sure the people on it go, but if other people would like to attend, we should allow them to by making sure it gets put on whatever that calendar that sends out the spam is. Over.
Good point. So, well, I'm not sure exactly which calendar you're talking about, but we'll make sure that we relay to as many stakeholders as we can when the meetings are, I guess.
I think it's the marketing group puts out a calendar announcement for like developer hours and other stuff. And
Oh, okay. So there's a main, so there are all the different subgroups calendars, and I know we're about to talk about this, so this is a good segue. So there's the calendars for like IOB, and there's one for architecture, and there's, you know, going to hope, and there's the one for the PGB. So there's all the subgroup calendars, and then there's one that's just called OCA. And that is the one that they have the office hours on because it's like an organization wide thing. So are you proposing that the TSC meeting be on that calendar?
probably because you want everybody to at least be aware of it, and anybody who wants to could go. I mean, if we only send it to the 8 members, then only the 8 members will ever know to go. So if we do something that allows everyone to see they at least have the choice of going, it would be better.
Yep.
Not, I would think.
No, that makes sense. We'll have to take a look and just make sure that the TSC members all have the permission to add to that, because I'm not sure. I'm not sure who has permission to add to that right now. But we'll
Well, whoever, I mean, it could be whoever the PGB runs, it could be who puts the meeting on the calendar. We don't, I mean, it's a monthly meeting, that's a set meeting. We can work out the administrivia. I just want to make sure it gets, people know it's there so they could attend it if they want. We can't we complain a lot that no one participates or goes, but you can't complain if you don't tell them about it.
It's true.
This is Claudia. We can easily add permissions. right? For people to add to the calendar.
All right. Well, anyway, I took a note, Duncan. We'll get that sorted. I agree with you. It should be probably for the whole organization, so it makes sense. All right, so discussion on working groups versus sub-projects and IPR guidance for GitHub. So this is kind of like a all-encompassing item to open up for discussion, something that we've been having some out-of-band chatter over the past week. We had a call between Chet, Claudia, Duncan, myself. Mark was there as well, talking about this topic. And so there's a couple of important points that I think we need to cover here on the PGB. So first is this IPR guidance that we received from GitHub, both from Jamie, Oasis Legal Counsel, as well as Chet. And Chet's here in the call, so he can jump in for more comments if required. So when we're using GitHub, right? So part of the goal of the working groups that we've created here at the OCA is to have a venue for folks to discuss a topic that is not yet ready for a project. But as we do that, we have to be very careful in how we talk about these working groups and what they are, right? Because there's very important intellectual property rights considerations that we have as part of the OCA that we all sign up for to be on the PGB. We have to sign the ECLA. To put anything in GitHub, you digitally sign the ECLA. And those things are important because they are what gives Oasis Open the rights to the artifacts that we're putting in there so that Oasis can be assured that we're not going to try to submarine patent them later, that they're not going to have some kind of copyright takedown thing taken against them in the future. And it's also important for if we as the OCA ever decide to go down the standards track for some of these activities, having that record of all of the folks signed off on their intellectual property that's contributed to that standard is important. So we don't do those things for a working group, and we don't do those things for working groups for a very good reason, because working groups aren't supposed to be creating things. If a working group is creating things, then we do need to start going down that path, and it should be transitioned into a project, and the folks that are contributing then have to go and sign up for the CLA. So we just wanted to lay that out and make sure people are clear and understanding. So first of all, what is working? So, and as a reminder, right now we've got two working groups in the OCA. We've got the IOB working group, which is having regular meetings chaired by Charlie. And we've got the Zero Trust Architecture working group, which is also having regular meetings. And then we've also got the Ontology project, which we'll get to here in a second. When we want to talk about this too, and the GitHub layout around that. So related to this as well, it's important for members to understand that when we're working on GitHub, it's okay for a member to add something to GitHub for another member if they don't understand how GitHub works, if you are positive that the other member has signed the CLA. We have to be very careful. We have to be very careful in taking files and artifacts from somebody and then putting them into GitHub under our account if we're not sure that they have actually signed off on the copyright material on those files. So I'm going to pause there and kind of open it up for questions. I see Duncan's raised his hand. So we'll start with Duncan.
So I agree we have IOB, and I agree we have Zero Trust as working groups. And I agree they're sort of on the path to become projects. We do also have the marketing group, and we do also have the architecture group independent of the Zero Trust group. In other words, there's more to it than just Zero Trust. So are they working groups or are they something different? Over.
So I'm going to chime in here with my opinion. I know Dee and Chad and Claudia are also all here. So the marketing group is a subcommittee. It's always been called the marketing subcommittee, and it was formed when when OCA was initially formed. We formed the marketing subcommittee right away, and the difference being that we didn't have working groups then. The marketing subcommittee doesn't create product. They don't create artifacts. So nothing that they do is creating IP. They're creating marketing collateral and materials, and
Isn't it marketing collateral an artifact?
so it is, but I don't know. Chat, help me out here. The difference is that anything you create for marketing, it's never going to make its way into a standard. It has no effect.
I know it's never going to make it standard. I assume we still have to make it CC BY or something like that, right?
Yeah, there's if I haven't looked at what the marketing committees have been doing. So so Duncan, thanks for bringing this up. This is a good point. They certainly create copyrighted material. So there's definitely IP. There's no patent risks. You know, it's not like they're creating something that's going to work its way into a product and then, you know, suddenly you're subject to a patent claim. So that's not a risk. But they are creating to the extent that they are creating materials or contributing materials that have got copyright attached to them, they've got to make those same kinds of promises. So
if they are a subcommittee of the PGB, which is what I always thought they were, so I like that answer. If they're a subcommittee of the PGB, then they are under the PGB rules, and everybody signed the CLA and all that stuff. So that's good.
correct.
But they should at least be on our lists of whatever we have. They should be on there, and they should be specified as, hey, this one's not a working group. It's a subcommittee of the PGB. You got to be a sponsor to be part of it, and you got to have signed the CLA.
So,
Yep.
I guess I don't so my challenge with that would just be logistics, I guess. I'm trying to figure out, and D, you know, you're not chair of that group, but you're very involved in it, right? So their artifacts are all put on that Google Drive, the Oasis marketing drive. And most of the folks on that call, like, they're not, no one there is going to be signing CLAs on GitHub. I don't know how it'll work.
No, but you want to make sure they're not doing, I mean, we have to set up, I trust everybody, but I still want the processes to verify. We want to set up that they're not putting out, you know, I'll pick on you, Jason, IBM copyrighted ads or whatever.
So here's one distinction that maybe is important. The marketing committee is only made up of PGB members.
Yeah, it's a subcommittee of the PGB, so that's a good point, and
they have all signed so a representative from their company has all signed the ECLA, but they have not necessarily.
Right. And just to be clear, the marketing group is a subcommittee of the OCA, not a subcommittee of the PGB. Right?
Well, then it needs its own set of rules then.
Does it really?
So, because all said and done, only PGB and TSC are in our bylaws and governance. If you make it a subcommittee of the PGB, it falls under PGB rules, which is easier. If you make it a peer to the PGB, we got to write a bunch of new rules, right?
Let me suggest that Claudia, D, and I huddle on this separately.
Yeah.
And get and figure out where we are, because I have not, to be honest, even thought about the marketing committee before, and I think that this is a good point. And of course, the last thing we want to do is go in with a lot of bureaucratic Yahoo that's going to, you know, sour those folks.
Participation more than right. So, yeah, participation is an issue with marketing, so I don't want to do anything to scare the folks that are willing to, you know, to work on different blogs and, you know, that sort of thing. So
yeah, so we'll huddle on it separately and come back to you. I don't really think it's a major issue, and I think we can resolve it and get the applicable rules documented without making a lot of trouble for everybody.
All right, thanks, Chet. So we'll leave that with Oasis then. That's fantastic. So so marketing committee aside, any other questions about this clarification we wanted to just make around working groups and sub projects? And again, I think so we have a little bit of work to do, I think, in clarifying this and making sure, you know, sending it out in copy and text to folks, but we will be doing that this week. Any other questions on this before we move to the next item? No? Okay. So the next list of items are all fairly minor. But again, you know, some of these we just need to field these with the PGB according to our rules. So we're just trying to get them out of the way. Again, working to lazy consensus. So we wanted to raise them all here, make sure that any questions, concerns can be answered. First is that, you know, to Duncan's point earlier, we're trying to organize the repos a little bit better to make it easier to work. And that's what most of this is around. We'd like to create, so we currently actually don't have a PGB repo in GitHub or a TSC repo. So we'd like to create those so that we can have, you know, the GitHub projects and GitHub issues tracker for action items that we have to track in both the TSC and the PGB. If we can start doing that, it should make things a lot easier to track through action items and whatnot. We'd also like to request to archive the SCAP v2 prototype repo. So this was the SCAP v2 project that predated PACE, that never really ended up going anywhere because it just as it was getting off the ground, you know, all the activity around all the activities that led up to the current U.S. federal executive order all hammered NIST, and they all got completely distracted around this project. So PACE kind of supplements it anyway. PACE is picking up in spirit from where this project left off, but PACE is its own repository. So we're not really working on this project anymore. So we want to archive that on GitHub. So any questions on these three before I scroll to the next page? No? Perfect. Once we do have these repos created and the project governing board created, you know, I'm going to request GitHub IDs for everyone to send their GitHub IDs so we can make sure that they're added to the PGB group on GitHub. Most of you aren't in there right now, so we gotta, you know, once we get that organized, I think it's going to be great because it's going to help us plan these meetings. It's going to help us coordinate better, just get better organized.
One thought, Jason, is maybe that'd be good work for Matthias and Xiao Kuei and TSC to do. I think there's a lot we can do with GitHub, and those are certainly not all, but two of the guys that know how to use it to its full extent.
Yeah, I'd agree, and I want them to do that for the TSC as well. So that's what these two are. Like, I'd like to do that for both the PGB and the TSC, so we can start getting more organized.
Yeah.
It's funny, if you go to our GitHub organization right now, there actually are PGB and TSC groups. They've been created since OCA was created. They're just no one's in them. We're not using them, right? So I think it's now overdue.
Yeah.
So next line item, adoption of an OCA Code of Conduct. So I'll hand this off to Duncan because he crafted it. The pull request is linked here in the chat. You know, for anyone who is familiar, you know, codes of conduct have become increasingly important in working in the open space over the past couple of years. And having a code of conduct, it can actually, you know, sorry, let's word it differently. Not having a code of conduct can actually detract from engagement on your project. There are increasingly you know, folks are looking for organizations that have been proactive and adopted codes of conduct to just to deal with, you know, things that hopefully never happen, but they can always happen around like abusers and people, you know, trolling a mailing list and you know, how do you deal with, you know, people who are just, you know, behaving inappropriately, etc. So we've got a proposed code of conduct. It's, you know, adopted from previously created, I believe, the open covenants or
No, well, it's actually the OCA. So OCA has a code of conduct, and OCA says its projects. I'm sorry, Oasis has a code of conduct, and it says its projects may or may not adopt or modify its code of conduct and have one of their own. And our governance actually says, hey, we should. It literally has some words in it like, hey, we should look at the Oasis one and decide. It doesn't actually say what ours is. So what the PR does is what the pull request does is it says, hey, let's just use the Oasis one. It's pretty good. And so it basically throws a header paragraph in there that's stolen literally out of the Oasis code of conduct. And then it says, and we'll abide by the Oasis code of conduct. The pull request, because it's a GitHub diff thing, you can see the changes, is the first link. And if you find that too hard to read, the second link is Claudia's repo that it was basically the sort of nice text was made in that was then diffed into our repo. So you can click on either of those links. You should be able to see it. The gist of what it says is we're going to follow the Oasis code of conduct, which I personally think is a pretty good one. I mean, having read it, it covers everything I could think of. But if anybody thinks we should have something else in our code of conduct, we can add it. It's not like I'm wedded to this answer. I just think, like Jason said, we should have one. It looks bad that we don't have one. Over.
yeah. So you know, I know that it's kind of a tall ask to go and read the lengthy document like that on this call. So, you know, give it a read when you have a chance. If you have any objection to what's in there, I doubt that you will, but or you know, or if you think that there's something glaring that's missing, like Duncan says, we really need to add such and such. I think we'll send this out to the mailing list. You know, hopefully it won't be contentious and we can get it adopted relatively quickly. All right, 2 more items. It looks like we are going to get through this today. It's amazing.
Don't jinx it.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, don't jinx it. Keep going.
Don't jinx it. All right. So, license change for documentation folder. So earlier we talked about all of the different working groups. So actually, let me. I'm going to flip the order of these. So let's go to the last paragraph first. So repos for these working groups and subprojects. So currently we have this documentation folder in the OCA, and it has a lot of different stuff in it. We have minutes from these meetings and other meetings. We actually have the minutes for all of the meetings are put in there. We have materials from marketing. We have enablement material for some of the projects. We have charters for the working groups are in that folder. It's kind of like this mishmash of documentation. Because it's kind of this mishmash, it's hard to link to any of these things. Like, let's say, you know, in the new website we're creating, we want to have, you know, we're going to want to call out the indicators of behavior working group. And if we wanted to link over to its artifacts, you can't just put a nice little link, because you have to put all these deep links into this folder because they're all over the place, because it's organized by data type as opposed to subject matter. So what we want to propose is that we should have repos for these working groups, and those working groups can have their artifacts in those repos. And when the documentation folder would turn into essentially only documentation. So if there's stuff like the stick shifter documentation, stuff like the Kestrel documentation, those types of things could be in the documentation folder, which is really what it should be, as opposed to this kind of catch-all where we put everything under the sun in there. I think if we do this, I think this would be a positive change, because it would just, it'll help from an organization point of view, right? Like if you're if you're Charlie and you're organizing the IOB, all of your stuff for the IOB will be in one place. You can have the minutes there, you can have the artifacts there, etc. So Dee's asking, why wouldn't each repo have a documentation folder? Maybe that's what we should do and just turf the current documentation folder. I don't know. So I wanted to so this then goes into the previous one about license change. So currently our documentation folder has no license. If we are going to keep it, it needs a license as per OASIS OP rules. And the proposal was to adopt the CC BY license because that is the license applicable to documentation. And that's what would require special majority vote because we haven't adopted it before. So we have to take a special majority vote and ensure that everyone in the OCA has a voice in whether or not we're going to adopt that license. If we decide to delete the documentation folder, we actually don't have to do that and it avoids the vote. But I would assert that we are then going to probably want to adopt that license for the documentation subfolders in all these projects. Because Apache license is not actually technically applicable to documentation. Anyway, so that was a mouthful, and I know that it can be hard to wrap your head around if you haven't been deep into this GitHub. But really, this is mostly about, just continuing the theme of getting ourselves a lot more organized and making it easier for new people to understand what's going on in the OCA. We've had new people come in of late. We're getting a lot more visibility, and it's becoming increasingly clear that when someone comes in, they're like lost. Like, what is going on here? So I see a couple hands. I'll start with Kent, and then we can go to Duncan.
Okay, well, I think Duncan was first, but in any case,
I'm sorry about that. I didn't see the order.
Yeah, the reality is, I think it makes total sense to first off deal with the license issue, so we don't have to do this on a project by project or subfolder by subfolder issue. I do like the idea of documentation being in the working group, so the products and projects themselves have their own place for that. It makes it a lot easier. I do believe we should be organized, and it wouldn't take that much to get there. It's just a matter of doing it.
All right, thanks, Kent. Duncan, you had your hand up.
Yeah, second to everything he just said, and I do think there are two separate issues. One issue, independent of how we organize any of this stuff, is, if I understand you correctly, right now we only have one agreed to license, and that's the Apache blah, 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 blah license. I would move that we allow the CC BY license as when any of the subgroups decide they want to put something under CC BY, the PGB agrees that is a valid license. I did not know CC BY was not a valid license for OCA. I think it should be independent of how we organize all this stuff. But I do think we should do all the other organization stuff. I think there are two different issues. One is we approve by special majority the use of CC BY, and second is we reorganize everything. I'm for both of them. Over.
So we can definitely do that. So we can open a ballot and seek to have CC BY approved. I'd second doing that. Is anybody opposed to that idea of just essentially pre-approving CC BY for the OCA so that in the future we can use that for documentation? And for folks who are unaware of what all of this is, right? So there are certain open source licenses that are open source licenses, and a subset of those has been approved by OASIS for use in OASIS open projects. Some of those are the Apache v2 license, which is kind of preferred by a lot of corporations because it has stronger patent protections than the other ones I'm about to mention. There's the MIT license, there is the BSD license, and I believe there's one more that OASIS approved as well. OASIS has not approved the GPL license and some others like that because of their virality. All of these licenses I just mentioned apply to software, and they talk a lot about what you can do with the source code and whether or not you have to provide the source code with the document. They don't make a lot of sense when applied to documentation, because if they were applied to documentation, then that means if I put a Word document in the GitHub repo, I also have to upload the binary markup of the Word document or something to that effect. It doesn't make any sense, right? So that's why these other licenses were created under CC, which stands for Creative Commons, an organization that's focused on open content licenses. So if you're licensing, documentation, pictures, PowerPoints, images, anything that's creative, the CC licenses are much more applicable than open source licenses. Well, hopefully that makes sense for folks in a nutshell who might not be all up in this IPR stuff. And, again, so it sounds like we don't have a lot of objection to that. If there's any concerns with any of this, we'll send an email summary of all these decisions, and folks can always raise concerns on the mailing list. And this special majority vote, what special majority means is we have to have a majority of OCA members vote. And I think it's, check and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's 60%. Does that have to pass by 2/3?
Well, yeah, if you're going to run on a special majority vote, first of all, staff has to run it. OASIS staff have to set it up and run it.
Okay.
And then it is 2/3 of the eligible voters must, at least 2/3 of the eligible voters must vote yes, and no more than a quarter can vote no. Full majority, on the other hand, the committee can run anytime they want to, and full majority is just over 50% of the voting eligible voters vote. I'm not sure. This probably does require a special majority vote. I should go back and look.
It does.
Okay.
I wouldn't have it in here if it didn't.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for backing me up on that then. So yeah, in that case, I'll work with you on the details, but Claudia or I will set the ballot up for you.
Yeah, I would not be signing up for a special majority vote if it wasn't required.
Right. Exactly.
Because it's hard. But yeah. Okay.
Well, actually, it's not as hard because we do the work.
Well, no, I mean, it's hard to get over the fence because we already struggle enough with full majority getting enough people to cast the ballots.
In other words, all of you listening to this, please do vote when it comes out. What happens is people ignore the vote.
Yeah, it's not, I think with a lot of the things in the OCA, what we're trying to do, it's not actually very contentious. It's just hard to get the votes in sometimes because everyone's really busy. And I get it. But if you see this in your inbox, please take 5 seconds to click the button.
Or if you're here for someone else because you're representing them and they're the official name on the list, warn them that, hey, when this arrives in your spam, go find it and click on it.
Good point. All right, so we made it through the agenda. We have 10 minutes to spare. Does anyone have anything actually interesting to talk about?
Dee, this is a lead in to you. Do you want to mention the meeting we just had?
I want to hear your take on it. You go first.
Okay. So as you guys probably all recall, I've been a pain in the butt on governance. And I've been a pain in the butt since last fall when involved in some SBOM activities. I thought, hey, this...
Sorry, Duncan, just before, because you mentioned, so we're still recording. I just want to remind you that this is all going to be on YouTube.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, but I appreciate that reminder. But anyway,
yeah, I'd probably stop recording.
All right, let's stop recording then.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before I stop recording, anybody have any other, topics relevant.
Were we going to talk about, this is Forrest, were we going to talk about the ontology project versus the Open DXL?
Yeah, I would love to talk about that. I also was going to ask about the architecture working group. You do have IOB and Zero Trust, but I don't see the architecture one. Does that need its own repro? Separate from Zero Trust and separate from
Doesn't
IOB?
it already have a repo? It doesn't?
No, it's in the everything's in
The
documentation.
original reason documentation was created. I asked.
Yeah, okay, so yes, Russ, so my opinion, unless others disagree, I think all of these things should be their own repos.
Seconded.
Okay, good. And second point of order is on repros. I know we're looking at Google Docs as a quote unquote repro because marketing is using it. I think on some cases, like the architecture group and the Zero Trust, I'd rather use a Google Doc repro than a GitHub repro because that's the type of people that are working in those groups. Well, they have the skill on Google, they don't have on GitHub. So we have a discussion on what repro we're communicating with here.
So I'll lean on Chet here, but so I believe that Oasis hasn't sorted that out yet for projects, like at how to comply with CLA while using Google and whatnot. So what I would suggest is we go ahead with GitHub for now, and once Oasis has that sorted for all open projects, we can then open that up as an option. Is that right, Chet?
An alternative.
Jason, I'll just add that it's on the front burner. You're not alone in feeling that way by a long shot. We've done a couple of proof of concepts, and it's on my plate to write up the how-tos and the wherefores and that sort of stuff, and so we're dealing with that now.
No, that's good. So just 2 points. One is marketing is doing it already, so we have set precedent. And two is I'd rather wait for that than create a GitHub repo then we're going to get rid of to then go to a Google Doc repo.
I think you should have both. The Google Doc should be for creating stuff and playing around and discussion and comments. And once you get something that you want to be an artifact, you want it, all said and done, you have to worry about the IP of it. Then you probably want to stick it in the GitHub eventually.
Eventually, I agree. Yeah, maybe
probably more Google group oriented, and the projects are more GitHub oriented. But there's no reason both can't have both.
I see I'm gonna delete. So here's my take. I don't think we're gonna necessarily be able to close this today. Especially since the docs is in flux with Oasis. I would suggest maybe for this group specifically, the Zero Trust Architecture group, which is very active, maybe they should just stick with what they're currently doing. And we will take care, we will not put documents in there from other third parties to GitHub. And, they would just continue for now until Chet and the Oasis team come back with what they're going to do with Google. I think that makes sense, actually. And that folder will only be used for Zero Trust. So it's not going to be this mishmash of stuff anymore, because we're going to make the other folders for the other things. Does that give anyone heartburn for the next month or so? All right. Anyone have anything? So I'm gonna close the recording.
Wait, no, do ontology. Ontology's
the ontology.
Oh, I'm sorry, Forrest.
Yeah, if I could just, maybe I could just summarize what I think is going on from our perspective, and then having talked with Duncan, and then we could just maybe make it a topic for the next month, because I don't think it's like critical decisions we have to make today. But as I had been proceeding, we had been proceeding as like a subgroup under the architecture group to discuss how or to explore how and if we could make an ontology that would help us with our architectural project, and articulating those things and showing the value of integrating these concepts via an ontology. And so we're kind of developing, we're just going off and developing a use case that we could be demonstrating to folks. So I had not seen it as a formal project yet. Then, as Duncan explained, his understanding was that the OpenDXL project that had been going forward was going to be sunsetted, or has already been sunsetted, and that was just going to turn into the ontology project that the work that we have been doing in the ontology subgroup. So I guess I'm fine with that, but we are still, for everyone's awareness, we're still at a very nascent stage, and I'm still actually exploring several other current artifacts to include UCO that MITRE and team have developed. And in fact, I'm just discussing right now with Defense Cybercrime Center, maybe getting a demo of how they're using that. So before we set out and make an official, this is going to be an artifact that's like an OCA thing, I'm still doing a lot of exploratory work. So that said, I'm okay with making it a project if we want, but I'm also okay with just keeping it like a sub-working group for now until we get a clearer picture of what we're actually going to produce and how useful it's going to be. That's my perspective.
So just a comment real quick. I thought a long time ago we agreed, and I don't think that it was done in GitHub, but a long time ago we voted and agreed that to rename the OpenDXL ontology working group to just the ontology working group. And I think there's still some remnants of OpenDXL naming here or there, but I mean,
That's correct. We did, and we have that. We have that recorded that we did that. So we agreed to rename. We specifically renamed it the OCA ontology. So we renamed OpenDXL ontology to OCA ontology. The PGB agreed to do it. I don't think we followed through on GitHub, Mark, because
It's still the old one. Yeah, it's still old.
yeah. So
Right, but it gives him the
perhaps
cover.
that
If we don't need to make a new project, we can just rename the old one.
yes.
Everything in that GitHub, that collateral that's in there is all related to the OpenDXL stuff, right?
Well, we can make a new repo. We now have the power to make new repos. So.
Yeah, we make a new repo. That makes sense. Yes.
So what I would propose,
Whatever's
Forrest,
easiest.
I think what you're doing, Forrest, is still very aligned and relevant to that project, right? In a way, it's kind of you're trying to get off the ground in a way that project didn't get off the ground, right? So to me,
Yeah,
I
that's
always
fine.
considered that you were not actually architecture, but that project.
That's
Here, here.
and that's totally fine, as long as everybody understands that's how nascent we still are, for any host of reasons. And I think again, part of it, trying not to develop a whole new product if we can avoid it. Yeah, that's fine.
I think that you're taking the right approach, by the way. Like, I know you're nascent, but at the same time, you've engaged all these external stakeholders, which to me, that is the bread and butter and what we are, right? As the OCA, is that we are, to me, we're a catalyst, we're the glue, we're trying to bring together some of these other groups, right? So, okay. Any other thoughts? If not, I'll close the recording. I can stick around for a few minutes to discuss that other thing though. All right, thanks everybody.